Hello, my name is Nairi and I run an adoption channel normally, and today I'm going to talk to you about what to expect every day, behaviours from teenagers, and then I'm going to expand that to kind of explain how that slightly differs with adopted children, or can slightly differ with adopted children. My story is I have 5 biological children, and when they were reaching 14 and above, I started fostering, and eventually we adopted 2 of the boys that we were fostering that we now have, and they're 11 and 12, so they're just pre-teen. And so I'm just going to explain to you kind of what I perceive to be teenage everyday behaviour. So the first thing I'm going to say is that most teenagers are pretty avoidant, so they avoid responsibility. They don't really want to hear what you have to say necessarily about what they need to be doing. They're beginning to tussle with their own independence. They're trying to fight you a little bit, to test you, to see if what you're saying goes, or whether they can kind of begin to step out a little bit. I guess it happens for each teenager at different times. I think for some of my biological children, I would say that push really started before they were teenage and went right on until they were about 19. And for others of them who were a little bit more sensitive and a bit shyer, who were more accepting of the status quo, perhaps those years were narrower. But it happens for every teenager at some point. And I would argue actually that if it doesn't happen, that maybe you would worry more, because you would want that teenager to kind of step out and try and be independent of you at some point. There's another thing that I think every teenager does, which I've noticed with all of my children, is they want to do adult things, what they perceive to be adult things, and for some that's more risky than others. So it could be that they want to watch films or programs that are more adult in content. It might be that they want to go places that are perceived to be more adult, or they may do things that they perceive to be more adult, like smoking, drinking, taking drugs. So I think every teenager has their idea of what is more adult, and because they're somewhere between being a child and an adult, and they're trying to push into adulthood, then they're testing out those adult things, or what they see as adult anyway. You might see as totally stupid because you're an adult and you've tried it already, or you know it's not healthy, you know it's not good for them, but they have not tried those things out. And of course they've got all the peer pressure behind that as well. So often our boys at the moment, even though they're 11 and 12, are coming home saying, and so watches this, and so does this gaming, and you will always know that that game or that program is older than what they are, and therefore they want to watch it. So I had a conversation with my son recently, the youngest one, who's 11, and I said to him, it doesn't matter how rubbish that film is, does it? Or how terrible that game is. You want to do it because it has a 12 on it and you're 11. And he just looked at me. I said, it's not really about whether that film's any good, is it? He suddenly realised the penny dropped that that's what he was doing. That's what he was asking for. Something that he thought he couldn't have that was more adult in content. So that's another thing I think that happens. I think when they get a little bit older than what our adopted sons are at the moment, when they are definitely into puberty, so again, I know that varies. For some children it's a lot later than others actually, but that's when you start to see real problems with daytime routine, nighttime routine. When my adult children were growing up, so my youngest adult child is 22, or is he 23? But anyway, when they were growing up, yes, there was the internet, yes, there were devices, but it wasn't as heavy as it is now. I think there's a massive issue around teenagers taking devices into the bedroom and then just not being able to switch off and get rid of that content out of their minds, out of the room, out of that place. You get very much the upside down days, that you get children that just are awake until 3 in the morning and then they can't get up, and everything goes upside down. Meal times, bedtimes. Partly that is because their bodies are changing. There's some research on the fact that their time clocks are all over the place as their bodies are changing, but partly again because of the pressure of screen time and friends being on late into the night. So if your friend watches something till 1 o'clock in the morning, then why on earth would you listen to your mum or your dad telling you that that's not a good idea? Because your friend is doing it. So if your friend is doing it and their parents let them, then why can't they? So upside down days and a lot of tiredness and a lot of kind of like irritability around that. A good thing that happens when your child reaches teenage years, or I think, but it can be a little bit intense, is every now and again you will have some sort of heart-to-heart with them. So you may have a very open child that chats about a lot with you, and if you do, you're so lucky. I think if teenagers continue to talk throughout their teenage years, that's such a lucky thing to have, because when teenagers close down and don't want to share, I think that's the worst thing. You don't know what's going on in their lives, and you need to know what's going on. You need to be there for them. Emotional outbursts or meltdowns are bound to happen, and heart-to-hearts are bound to happen as they are developing their emotional well-being and again changing into adulthood. So you'll find them having conversations with you about things that maybe you don't want to talk about, but they do. And it tends to be when you're trying to get something done, or you're in the car and then suddenly it'll all come out, and it might be something around sexuality, it might be something around bereavement. It's subjects that are more difficult, and I think around teenage years that's when they start to explore those issues, and it's great to be there for them. And you won't have all the answers, but it's great to be there for them. So those are just like 4 things that I think happen with teenagers anyway. Now let's look at adopted teenagers, tell you what those differences are then with adopted children, some things that they have to contend with that biological children don't have to contend with, in my view anyway. Every teenager has identity issues as they're trying to work out who they are in the world, and whether they want to be more like you, whether they want to be more like their friends, or none of the above. But obviously the adopted child has the wrestling of whether they want to be seen as an adopted person or not an adopted person, whether they want to think about what their family history was and take with them some of those things. Are they going to reflect back on that family history, and do they want to take any of that identity? It's where they wrestle between the adopted identity, the non-adopted identity, and what those identities bring, and hopefully they meet somewhere in the middle for them, where they take some of what you have to offer them and some of what their history has to offer them, probably some of what their peers have to offer them. So actually it's 3 strands, but obviously they have 3 strands, whereas other children don't have 3 strands, and somehow they've got to try and work that out and interweave that in. And for some children that causes huge crisis points, and for others it doesn't. For some children that are maybe not that settled within their family, so if they're not that settled within your family now and you're having a lot of issues with them, they may want to pull in a lot more of the adoption strands, and they may fight against you a lot more because they want to know and they want to be part of that adoption history a lot more. Obviously, depending on whether you have an open or closed adoption will depend on how you deal with that, but nevertheless it will bring issues. Another thing that you might find with your adopted child, or highly like to at some point, is that trust issue. So however young your child was, if they have found out that they're adopted, then they will realise that at some point there was a situation where they were taken away or they were given up, and therefore they have that trust issue there. So at some point they were taken away from someone by authorities or given up by parents. So the trust of adults is not great, and it's not going to be as secure as children that haven't experienced that. They may start going into themselves and start to have trust issues again around you and around authority figures. And actually there's more of a chance, in my opinion, of adopted children gravitating even more toward their peers. I mean, children do that anyway, but even more to what their peers say. And for our boys, we've always known that their pattern, their avoidant pattern, especially when they were younger and work and assessment was done on them, they never brought adults into the mix of those stories to be the resolving features in their lives. Adults were not there to be trusted, and we still see that now in them. So rather than they come to us to ask for help, they will kind of go to each other, or they will seek out answers from elsewhere, when actually we probably have the answers for them, but there's always that trust issue there. And the third one, the most significant one in my mind, is that as they're going through puberty and their brains are changing, things are going on up here and developing, naturally speaking, then they're likely to revisit trauma, and trauma may feature a lot more in their dreams, in their lives. Flashbacks might happen, memories might happen that had gone away or they'd put into a little box are now going to open up again. And so lots more questions around potential abuse and neglect situations, or things that perpetrators may have done to them with those flashbacks. And when you're already going through teenage years and trying to work out who you really are in the world, which is what every teenager has to do, and then you have to deal with trauma and horrible thoughts, horrible dreams, things coming upon you, of course that's going to deliver a huge more amount of stress. So if you are thinking of adopting a teenager, or you've adopted an older child who's going to be a teenager soon, it's an opportunity, obviously, to help them to overcome extra trauma during those years. It's a time when the brain is more elastic. It's going to allow you to work with them more, but obviously it's going to be a time of big challenge because teenage years are anyway, and then you have these extra issues on top. So guys, I hope that's helped you to understand the type of behaviours that teenagers go through anyway, and the extras that adopted children might have to face. And if you found that interesting, please check out my channel, because on my channel there is another video on teenagers, but also there are lots of playlists for you to explore around attachment, therapeutic parenting, adoption and parenting, questions adopters ask, ages for adopting. Thank you.